3. Destruction of the party in the period after Yugoslav liberation. The Titoid theoreticians were busy developing a new conception of the Communist Party, a development of Marxism which in fact went back on and repudiated every principle of party organization for which Marxism had ever fought. This theory was that the Communist Party should be hidden from the people, that it should dissolve itself into the wider popular organization of the People's Front, which should become the main organization of the Yugoslav people. Should the Communist Party openly put its program before the people and openly work to win support for it? No, replied Tito, for the Communist program is in no way different from that of the People's Front. Has the Communist Party of Yugoslavia any program other than the program of the People's Front? No. The Communist Party has no other program. The program of the People's Front is the program of the party. Tito's report to the Second Congress of the People's Front of Yugoslavia, the 27th of September 1947, is the Communist Party the vanguard organization of the working class, the highest form of class organization of the proletariat? No. Once again replies Tito, since the People's Front last of all represents not only the political unity of our people, but also fraternity and unity in the national sense, it cannot be replaced by any other party. Hence the People's Front is becoming the permanent political organization of the people. Tito's report to the Second Congress of the People's Front of Yugoslavia, the 27th of September 1947. The first point in the statutes of the Yugoslav People's Front, main organizational principles of the People's Front of Yugoslavia, stated that the People's Front of Yugoslavia is the main political force. My italics, JK. And what was the People's Front? The People's Front played a great and progressive role in the Liberation War and could have continued to do so in the period following liberation. It was developed on Communist Party initiative prior to the German attack on Yugoslavia, formed from different groups including a number of the old political parties as well as individuals. It embraced representatives of the Croat Republican Peasant Party, the Republican Party of Serbia, the Democratic Party and the Independent Democratic Party, the National Peasant Party of Serbia and the Agrarian Union, which later merged to become the United Agrarian Party of Serbia, as well as representatives of the trade unions and of the mass organizations of the youth and the women, etc. The People's Front, therefore, contained bourgeois and petty bourgeois parties, kulaks, traders and manufacturers, as well as workers, peasants and intellectuals. Gilles, reporting at the initial foundation conference of the Communist Information Bureau in August 1947, stated that there are no ideological, religious nor any obstacles to joining the People's Front. Conceived of as the mass popular organization led by the working class and the Communist Party, and being drawn into action against home and foreign reaction, shedding its reactionary members, the People's Front could have played an important role in consolidating the popular democratic regime. But instead of that, it was built up by the Titoites to absorb, and eventually to replace, the Communist Party. What was the result? The Communist Party was hidden, concealed from the people. In a regime that was supposed to be led by the communists, the party had a semi-legal status. If you went in 1946 or 1947 to Belgrade, you could find no open office of the Communist Party. There were no declarations, resolutions, statements made by the Communist Party. The membership of the party was concealed from the working people. Even the daily organ of the Communist Party, Borba, carried next to no news or information on the life and activities of the party. Between Liberation and July 1948, not one party decision was published by Borba. Take a typical practical example of the fruits of this policy. In the Big Železnik works near Belgrade there were some 4,000 workers employed, of whom 160 were party members. Party meetings were held secretly. None of the non-party workers knew where the meetings took place, what was discussed at them or what decided. None of the non-party workers knew who were the members of the party. Party members shamefacedly tried to put across party decisions without saying that they were proposals of the Communist Party. New recruits were recruited by secret invitation. Therefore, for the mass of Yugoslav working people, the Communist Party appeared as a type of secret conspiratorial society that dominated their lives without showing itself. Its decisions were maneuvered across the working people by individual communists holding positions in the state. The habitual attacks of the enemies of communism on the party as a secret conspiracy became, in the case of Yugoslavia, the truth. Thus, instead of acting as an open vanguard trying to raise the political level of the working class and the working people, the party was reduced to the level of the most backward, and was merged, dissolved into the People's Front. This was a complete break with Lenin's conception of a communist party and its role. Lenin wrote, "We are the party of a class, and therefore almost the entire class, and in times of war, in the period of civil war, the entire class should act under the leadership of our party, should adhere to our party as closely as possible. But it would be manilovism and kvostism, that is, complacency and tailing behind reality, JK, to think that at any time under capitalism the entire class, or almost the entire class, would be able to rise to the level of consciousness and activity of its vanguard, of its social democratic, that is, communist, JK, party, to forget the distinction between the vanguard and the whole of the masses which gravitate towards it, to forget the constant duty of the vanguard to raise ever wider strata to this most advanced level, means merely to deceive oneself, to shut one's eyes to the immensity of our task, and to narrow down these tasks." Lenin, "One step forward, two steps back," quoted by Stalin in The Foundations of Leninism, Chapter 8. Of course, in the period of illegality between the wars, the Yugoslav Communist Party could not hold open meetings, but despite all the difficulties its line and policy was brought before the people through illegal leaflets and publications. But now, in a period of the most complete legality, the party was concealed, dissolved, its program and policy hidden, its leading role abandoned. Instead of proudly appearing before the people, and proudly and publicly proclaiming their aims, the membership of the party, on orders of the Tito clique, were losing their party identity. But it was not only in relation to the role of the party that the Titoites were violating the tenets of Marxism-Leninism and throwing overboard all the most valuable experiences of the CPSUB. The same applied to their theory and practice of the internal organization of the Communist Party. Tito, Kartal, Chilas, and above all, in this field, Rankovic were virtually, as a narrow dominating power group, dictating party policy from above. They practiced the military method of party leadership advocated by Trotsky. It was not by chance that Trotsky's rightist conception of a party composed of all and sundry was combined with Trotsky's leftist conception of orders from above. As usual, the rightist and leftist practices led to the same result of destroying the revolutionary character of the Communist Party. Party elections at all levels ceased. Leaderships were organized by co-option. Internal discussion was discouraged. Criticism and self-criticism were suppressed. And Rankovic abused his position of Minister of Internal Affairs and head of the Security Police (UDBA) to take ruthless disciplinary measures against party members who dared to discuss or criticize the dictates of the ruling clique. Only a study of the organizational methods of the CPSUB, as taught by Lenin and Stalin and practiced by the CPSUB, can bring out to the full the extent to which the Rankovic regime in the Yugoslav Party was a violation of Marxism-Leninism. Once again, there was no excuse in the fact that the Yugoslav Party had been illegal between the wars and on a war footing during the liberation struggles. The Bolsheviks had known and had taught how to move from illegality in war to a position of legality. In 1923, after the period of war communism in the Soviet Union, Stalin had explained the new tasks of the party. First, in every way and tirelessly to combat the survivals and habits of the war period in our party, combat the incorrect view that our party is some kind of a system of departments and not a militant organization of the proletariat which thinks actively, is self-sufficient, lives a full-blooded life, destroys the old and creates the new. Second, it is necessary to increase the activity of the party masses by submitting for discussion all questions that interest them, since there is no reason why these questions should not be discussed openly, by ensuring the opportunity for free criticism of each and every point raised by party organs. For only thus can discipline be transformed into a really conscious, really iron discipline. Only thus can the political, economic and cultural experience of the party masses be raised. Third, it is necessary to elect all party organs and officials. An end must be put to the practice of ignoring the will of the majority of the organization when nominating comrades for responsible party posts. We must see to it that the election principle is carried out. On the Tasks of the Party, the 2nd of December 1923, Collected Works, Russian edition, Volume 5, pages 36,263. It was under the guidance of Lenin and Stalin that this adaptation of the party to the new period was carried out. With the elimination of Tsardom, the victory of the October Revolution and the defeat of the interventionist forces, the principles of democratic centralism, as Lenin outlined them, were fully established in the Bolshevik Party. In order to function properly and guide the masses systematically, the party must be organized on the principles of centralism, having one set of rules and uniform party discipline, one leading organ, the Party Congress, and in the intervals between the Congresses, the Central Committee of the Party. The minority must submit to the majority, the various organizations must submit to the center, and lower organizations to higher organizations. Failing these conditions, the party of the working class cannot be a real party and cannot carry out its tasks in guiding the class. Of course, as under the Tsarist autocracy the party existed illegally, the party organizations could not in those days be built upon the principle of election from below, and as a consequence, the party had to be strictly conspiratorial. But Lenin considered that this temporary feature in the life of our party would at once lapse with the elimination of Tsarism, when the party would become open and legal, and the party organization could be built up on the principles of democratic elections, of democratic centralism. Stalin, Short History of the CPSU, B. Chapter 2. Lenin and Stalin always taught that there can be no democratic centralism within the Communist Party without criticism from below upwards as well as from above downwards, and without self-criticism. But testing from above far from exhausts the whole business of checking up. There is still another kind of checkup, the checkup from below, where the masses, the subordinates, examine the leaders, point out their mistakes, and show them ways of correcting them. This kind of verification is one of the most effective ways of testing people. The rank-and-file party members verify their leaders at meetings of active party workers, and conferences and congresses, by listening to their reports, by criticizing their defects, and finally by electing or not electing some or other leading comrades to the leading organs. Precise operation of democratic centralism in the party is demanded in our party statutes. Unconditional submission of party organs to election, the right of putting forward and withdrawing candidates, secret ballot, freedom of criticism and self-criticism, all these and similar measures must be carried into life, in order incidentally to facilitate the check-up on and control over the leaders of the party by the rank-and-file party members. Stalin, on practical work, Little Stalin Library, No. 6, p. 15. It has always been stressed in Marxist-Leninist teaching that you cannot proceed towards socialism smoothly and easily, nor will the party be able to lead that advance without its members, including its leaders, making mistakes. Self-criticism is not just a passing phenomenon. It is something essential to the life and theoretical progress of the party. It is a method of training the cadres of the working people in the spirit of Marxism. A party or a party member can be judged by their attitude to their own mistakes. Do they reject criticism, take it as a personal insult, a blow to their prestige? Or do they welcome it, learn from it, self-critically review their own work, recognize their mistakes, look for the reasons for them, and try to correct them? True communists will never be frightened of recognizing their own mistakes. It is only bourgeois parties and bourgeois politicians who fear the truth. The attitude of a political party towards its own mistakes is one of the most important and surest criteria of the seriousness of the party and of how it fulfills in practice its obligation towards its class and towards the toiling masses. To admit a mistake openly, to disclose its reasons, to analyze the conditions which gave rise to it, to study attentively the means of correcting it, these are the signs of a serious party. This means the performance of its duties, this means educating and training the class, and then the masses. Lenin, Left-Wing Communism, Chapter 7. All revolutionary parties which perished hitherto did so because they became conceited, failed to see wherein lay their strength, and feared to speak of their weaknesses. Lenin, at the 11th Congress of the CPSU, B. March 1922. But the leaders of the Yugoslav Communist Party were supremely arrogant. They not only refused to recognize their mistakes, to learn from them and correct them, they refused even to admit that it was possible that they might have made mistakes. All the letters received from the CPSUB and from the other communist parties in the first half of 1948 were concealed from their membership and rejected without a party discussion. It might have been possible to consider them wrong-headed but sincere if, after full party discussion, they had for a period held to their policy. But what did they do? Is it possible to think of any sincere and honest party leadership, having received criticism from a party of the experience and achievements of the CPSUB, rejecting these criticisms without a full discussion throughout the party from top to bottom? Is it possible to think of an honest communist who would not be proud to receive criticisms from the parties whose leaders were Stalin, Dimitrov, Rákosi, Togliatti or Thorez? And when the resolution of the Communist Information Bureau was published, and the Yugoslav communist leaders could no longer conceal it from their members, what did they do? They sent a long 10,000-word arrogant reply, not admitting a single error, before their party members could possibly have time to discuss the resolution. They sent 10,000 words of reply without one word of self-criticism. Two leading revolutionaries, Zujovic and Habrang, members of their own Central Committee, were already in prison for having dared to criticize the leading Titoites. At the time when the Information Bureau's resolution was published, end of June 1948, the Yugoslav Fifth Party Congress was fixed for the third week in July. Any honest party leadership would have postponed the Congress. If I were asked at this moment what I would do if I had the power to do anything in relation to the Yugoslav Congress, I would postpone it for 3 months in order to allow internal party discussions to take place in the factories and branches on the Communist Information Bureau resolution, so that when the Congress takes place, the issues would have already been discussed and a certain clarity gained. Harapolit, reply to discussion at aggregate meeting of London Communist Party members on the 7th of July 1949, World News and Views, No. 28, 1949, p. 302. Far from pursuing such a democratic course, the Titoite reply to the Information Bureau tried to distort the whole character of the criticisms made. The Titoite press immediately launched a large-scale open attack on the resolution. Meetings were hastily summoned at which all those criticizing the Titoite leadership were ruled out of order, after which many were expelled from the party and sent to prison. Hand-picked delegations were dispatched to the party congress which, instead of being a congress of criticism, self-criticism and prolonged discussion, was transformed into a series of bitter harangues of the Titoite leaders against the Information Bureau. The Fifth Congress had nothing whatsoever in common with communism. A letter sent from leading Belgrade communist students to the Information Bureau reveals what methods were used to force on the party membership the Titoite line. Here are a few extracts from this letter, the full text of which was published in For a Lasting Peace, for a People's Democracy, No. 1720, the 1st of September 1948. We are approaching you in this fashion since through our party organizations it is impossible for us to express our solidarity with the resolution of the Information Bureau. We wholeheartedly agree with you that the slightest criticism is followed by reprisals. The party is ruled by military methods. With regard to the case of Zujovic and Habrang, the first we heard was different versions of the matter from non-party people and from abroad. Only later were we summoned to a party meeting and informed that they had been removed from the Central Committee because of inimical activities. We were told that the matter was being investigated and that we would be kept informed. At the next meeting, the report of the commission which conducted the investigation and a statement of the political bureau of the party was received. According to these documents, Zhujovic during the Fifth German offensive against the partisans influenced one of the partisan divisions to try and break through the enemy encirclement. Due to this action, the partisans allegedly found themselves in a critical situation. But our questions: why was Zhujovic not tried then and there as a traitor, and why was he promoted to the rank of general for his part in that particular operation, remained without answer. The letter outlined how all genuine criticism of Titoite policy was smothered and suppressed in the party branches at the university. The procedure at the conference in the veterinary faculty was as follows. On the first day, a meeting of all the party members was summoned for the purpose of expressing confidence in the Central Committee. Due to disagreement among the members, a unanimous vote was not forthcoming. Next day, when the majority of party members in the faculty were engaged elsewhere, the secretary of the party group and members of the university committee got together far less than 2/3 of the party membership and manipulated a vote of confidence in the Central Committee. In the mining faculty, the meeting lasted 2 hours. 1.5 hours were devoted to reading the 2 texts. The remaining half hour was given over to discussion. However, the moment one of the members suggested that the Central Committee should have attended the meeting of the Information Bureau, the discussion was stopped. The letter continues with a detailed description of how, in the Polytechnic faculty, the Technological Department and the Mechanics Department, efforts were made to suppress discussion and force decisions favorable to the Titoites on the party members. During the meetings, lists were compiled of all those daring to support the Information Bureau or disagree with the Titoite line in any way. There followed mass expulsions and mass arrests of party students in the university. An American correspondent, June Kanan, was expelled from Yugoslavia for reporting the opposition of Belgrade student communists to the Titoite leaders. Thus a brutal attack was made on what had always been one of the best and most combative centers of communism in Yugoslavia, and a purge of progressive students carried through. This is how the Yugoslav communist leaders put into practice the Marxist-Leninist principle of democratic centralism. IV. Bourgeois nationalism. The national liberation struggles of the Yugoslav peoples justly won the admiration of progressive people throughout the world. But when the war was over and when Yugoslavia was liberated, the leaders of the Yugoslav Communist Party and the clique around Tito began to paint a picture of the Yugoslav struggle which depicted it as qualitatively different from the resistance movement of other peoples, such as that of the French people or the Bulgarian people, for instance. They began to spread the myth that, unlike other peoples, the Yugoslavs had been liberated solely by their own efforts. And they began to forecast a perspective of Yugoslav development separate from and independent of the other people's democracies and the Soviet Union. In the post-war period from 1945 to mid-1948, the leading Titoites praised the Soviet Union and its Communist Party in their open pronouncements. But already in secret, in their own circles, they were attacking and defaming the USSR. And by publishing a distorted picture of the Yugoslav liberation movement, they were trying to belittle its role amongst their own people and to weaken their gratitude to and admiration for the Soviet people and the CPSUB. for what could be more distorted than a picture of the liberation of Yugoslavia from Axis occupation and of building socialism in Yugoslavia apart from and independent of the USSR? Could the Yugoslav national liberation movement ever have taken the form that it did and reached the proportions it did, if the main Nazi forces had not been contained and then driven back and defeated by the Red Army? Could the Yugoslav partisan forces that were scoring such successes in the hills and forests ever have driven out the Nazis from the main cities without the Red Army? Would Belgrade and other great Yugoslav cities have been freed without the Red Army? The Soviet troops of the Second and Third Ukrainian fronts crossed the rivers Drava and Tisa in the latter half of 1944, liberated Serbia and the Vojvodina, and on the 20th of October 1944, fighting alongside the 1st and 12th Corps of the Yugoslav People's Liberation Army, liberated Belgrade, the Yugoslav capital. Commenting on the role of the Red Army in those days, the Chief of Staff of the Yugoslav forces, Colonel General Arso Jovanovic, wrote in his pamphlet The Belgrade Operation, "The great Russian people has been our hope and guarantee throughout the ages." Such was also the case this time. The Soviet army gave us fraternal disinterested aid. Soviet soldiers shed their blood on the soil of our native land, in Serbia, in the streets of Belgrade, in Srem. Out of the joint suffering and bloodshed there grew the invincible fraternity and unity of the two Slav countries. This is the only correct foreign political orientation which corresponds to the age-old strivings, cultural and historical development of our peoples. This is the sole guarantee that our peoples will save themselves from national misfortune, and there have been many misfortunes in our bitter history. Colonel General Arso Jovanovic knew and recognized the decisive role of the Red Army in the liberation of Yugoslavia. But for this knowledge, and above all for the frank and open recognition of this historical fact, he was to be assassinated by the Tito clique. The liberation of Belgrade was a mortal blow at the Nazi forces in Yugoslavia and their quisling allies inside the country. Over 150,000 German soldiers and great quantities of equipment were captured. The Soviet army rendered every assistance in reorganizing the partisan units into a modern and regular army. It provided modern equipment, artillery, tanks and aircraft. On the request of the Yugoslavs, Soviet military experts helped to train the reorganized units. The Red Army handed over to the Yugoslav army all the equipment captured at Belgrade. More than 10 infantry divisions were supplied with arms from the Danube supply line. When in January 1945, the Germans broke through on the Srem front, and once again threatened Belgrade, Marshal Tolbuchan detached large forces from the Hungarian front around Lake Balaton, and smashed the Nazi offensive. Could Yugoslavia or any of the other people's democracies of Eastern Europe ever have established their people's democracies and set the course for socialism without the aid, friendship and protection of the USSR, which alone saved them from liberation in the Anglo-American imperialist manner, which alone preserved them from armed imperialist intervention, as dreamed of by Churchill? Was it not the Soviet Union that sent in without delay, and despite the devastation of its own territories, food and economic aid of all kinds in the most critical period in 194,445, when the West was still trying to extort from Yugoslavia political concessions in return for food for its starving population? How could it be thought, even for a moment, that in face of the greedy onslaught of Western imperialism, Yugoslavia could preserve its independence except in alliance and friendship with the Soviet Union and the people's democracies. Indeed, what genuine communist would have been anything but proud and content to acknowledge the decisive role of the Soviet Union in the liberation of Yugoslavia and in its advance to socialism. The truth is that the Tito clique was following a bourgeois nationalist and not a Marxist and proletarian internationalist path. Though at first secretly, and undercover, it was trying to wean the Yugoslav people away from friendship and alliance with the USSR and other people's democracies. No sooner had the resolution of the Communist Information Bureau been published than the Titoites began to come into the open as nationalists, stirring up the old chauvinist hatreds that had been played on for so long by the great Serbs, the old Serb chauvinists, against the Hungarian, Romanian, Greek and Albanian peoples, and gradually turning to direct open attack on the USSR and the CPSUB. The open turn of the Titoite leaders to nationalism reflected their efforts to restore capitalism in Yugoslavia. They opened a fatal path before the Yugoslav people of return to the old order, of becoming once again a semi-colony in the orbit of Western imperialism. What is the deviation towards nationalism? The deviation towards nationalism is the adaptation of the internationalist policy of the working class to the nationalist policy of the bourgeoisie. The deviation towards nationalism reflects the attempts of one's own national bourgeoisie to undermine the Soviet system and to restore capitalism. Stalin, report to the 17th Congress of the CPSUB, January 1934, Problems of Leninism v. Conclusion. There is no doubt that the resolution on the situation in the Yugoslav Communist Party came as a shock to communists and progressives all over the world. Most of us had made the mistake of confusing the achievements and sacrifices of the Yugoslav peoples with the actions of the group of leading Titoites. We took men like Tito, Kartal, Rankovic and Gilas for what they claimed to be, viewed their actions uncritically, and failed to see how they were, beneath the surface, betraying the cause of the national liberation movement and leading their peoples down a false and dangerous path. The resolution pierced the curtain of deceit. It revealed the departure from Marxism-Leninism of the Yugoslav party leaders around Tito, pointed to the nationalism that was rising to the surface and that earlier had been concealed beneath the surface, and showed where this policy would inevitably lead. It was in the first place the vigilance and deep political experience of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union that pointed to the errors of the Tito clique. It was on the initiative of the CPSUB that the resolution of the Communist Information Bureau was adopted. In years to come, this resolution will be seen as one of the most decisive documents in the history of the international working class movement. For it not only showed in the clearest terms the errors of Tito, Kartal, Gilas, Rankovic and other Yugoslav party leaders, but it enabled other communist parties which had been influenced by Titoite doctrines to correct their mistakes, and raised before all parties deep theoretical principles which aroused profound discussion and allowed them to continue their struggles with greater understanding and clearer perspective. To the Soviet comrades who took this initiative we should express our deepest gratitude. The discussion of the resolution of the Communist Information Bureau, which took place in all communist parties, won the complete support of communists throughout the world. There was not the vestige of a rift in the ranks of the parties. All those who participated in the discussions came in the course of them to understand the correctness of the principles outlined. But there was one question that remained open. How was it that these errors had come to be committed? Were they simply mistakes of policy, or was there something else behind them? Why did British and American reactions seem to attach so much importance to the Tito clique? How could such a group of men as the Yugoslav communist leaders around Tito refuse to discuss criticisms made by other fraternal parties? What explanation could be behind the totally uncommunist behavior of the Yugoslav communist leaders? These questions did not receive a full answer until the Reich, Kostov and Kosygzak's trials showed that the mistakes of the Titoites were part of a conscious, counter-revolutionary plan of direct agents of Anglo-American imperialism.